Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for another session of our CISSP study group. I'm B-Dubs, and I can't tell you how thrilled I am to see all of you here. Whether you're actively preparing for the CISSP exam or just expanding your cybersecurity knowledge, you're in the right community. I truly appreciate your commitment to learning, and I can't wait to dig into today's material with you. In our previous session, we explored Domain 2, Objectives 2.1 and 2.2. If you weren't able to join us, then no worries at all. I've created a playlist where you can catch up on any sessions you've missed. I'll drop that link in chat right now. Today we're diving in deep into a really important part of the exam, Domain 2, the data lifecycle and asset retention. We're going to be focusing on 3 specific objectives today. 2.3, provision information and assets securely. 2.4, manage data lifecycle. And 2.5, ensure appropriate asset retention. These objectives cover everything from how we get our hands on information and assets in a secure way to how we manage that data throughout its entire life. And finally, how we make sure to keep the right things around for the right amount of time. Before we jump into the specifics, let's take a quick look at the big picture here. Domain 2, asset security. It's the heart of information security. It's all about recognizing that information and the systems that hold it are valuable. Just like you wouldn't leave your valuables lying around, we need to protect our organization's digital assets. This domain teaches us how to identify what assets we have, figure out how important it is with classification, and then put the right security controls in place to protect our assets. Let's get right into exam objective 2.3, which says provision information and assets securely. Now, provisioning. It might sound like a techie jargon word, but it's actually pretty straightforward. It simply means getting things set up and ready to use, but in a secure way. Think about when you get a new laptop. You don't just start using it straight out of the box, right? At least I hope you don't. You install security software, set a strong password, and maybe encrypt the hard drive if you're feeling extra. That's provisioning. It's about making sure that from the moment an asset, whether it's hardware, software, or even data, comes into our organization, it's handled responsibly and securely. We're talking about allocating or assigning assets to authorized personnel, maintaining accurate tracking systems for inventory and usage, and implementing proper management controls throughout the asset's entire lifecycle, from initial deployment to eventual retirement or destruction. The foundation of secure provisioning is ownership. Every single asset needs a designated owner. This isn't just about having someone to blame if things go wrong. It's about having someone who's accountable for protecting that asset. This person is usually called the data owner, and they're typically a senior manager. They're the ones who decide how sensitive the data is. Is it top secret, confidential, or is it public? And they're responsible for making sure the right security controls are in place. They might delegate some of the day-to-day tasks, like backing up the data, to someone else, but ultimately, they're the ones on the hook. Remember, a data owner can delegate responsibility, but they cannot delegate accountability. Now let's talk about asset classification boards. These are special teams that bring together people from different parts of the organization to look at how we classify and protect our assets. Think of them as the security council for your organization's data. These boards play a crucial role when data owners aren't quite sure how to classify certain information, or when we need a consistent process to make sure everyone's following the same standards. They're especially helpful when we're dealing with complex situations, where it's not immediately clear how sensitive the data might be. When these boards help determine the value of an asset, they look at several key factors. First, they consider any laws and regulations that might apply. We absolutely have to get this right, or we could eventually be fined for not complying with regulations. I don't know is not a valid excuse here. They look at privacy requirements. Protecting the personal information of other people is a huge responsibility. They evaluate the costs, both what it took to create or acquire the asset and what it would cost to replace it. They assess the operational impact. In other words, what would happen to our business if we lost this asset? Then consider potential legal consequences. Could we face lawsuits or fines if this information was compromised? And finally, they think about reputation. How would a security breach affect our organization's image? Now, you can't protect what you don't know you have. That's why an asset inventory is absolutely essential. Think of this as your organization's master catalog, a detailed record of everything you own and need to protect, both tangible and intangible. Tangible assets are the things you can physically touch. I'm talking about your servers humming away in the data center, the laptops on everyone's desk, your network devices keeping everything connected, and yes, even those old backup tapes collecting dust in the storage room. But we can't forget that we also have intangible assets. These are often more valuable than the physical stuff, but they're trickier to track because you can't physically touch them. We're talking about your organization's patents, your trademarks, your company's reputation in the market, and even the collective knowledge and expertise of your employees. These might not have a physical form, but they're absolutely critical to your organization's success and need just as much protection, if not more, than your tangible assets. Now, hopefully we've got a handle on why tracking our assets is so crucial. Let's dig into the nitty-gritty of how we actually manage these assets effectively. Asset management isn't just about keeping a list. It's about actively protecting and controlling our resources throughout their entire life cycle. Having an inventory is just the first step. You also need to manage those assets effectively. This is where tools like Configuration Management System or CMS come into play. You might also see things like barcodes or RFID tags used to track physical items, similar to how a library keeps track of its books. Asset management also involves both software licensing and access control. Software licensing is a big one. You need to make sure you're using software legally and that you're not exceeding the number of licenses you've paid for. Software vendors love to audit companies, and the fines for non-compliance can be brutal. Then access control is where we apply the principles of need to know and least privilege. People should only have access to the assets they absolutely need to do their jobs, no more and no less. It's all about limiting exposure and preventing unauthorized access. Let's think about some real-world examples to help illustrate these concepts in action. First, let's think about asset tracking. Many large organizations issue hundreds or even thousands of laptops to their employees. One effective way they manage these assets is through RFID tags. These tiny electronic tags allow the company to monitor where their laptops are at any given point in time, track who's using them, and importantly, help prevent theft. It's a simple but powerful example of secure asset management in practice. Another crucial example is software license management. Proactive organizations regularly conduct software audits to ensure they're staying compliant with their licensing agreements. This isn't just about avoiding legal troubles, though that's certainly important. It's also about being efficient with resources. Regular audits help companies identify if they're paying for more licenses than they need, or if they need to purchase additional ones to stay compliant. It's a perfect example of how good asset management can both protect your organization and potentially save money. So let's wrap up what we've learned about Objective 2.3. Think of secure provisioning as setting up your security game plan right from the start. It's like when you're moving into a new house. You want to know exactly what you have, who's responsible for what, how you're going to keep track of everything, and who gets access to which areas. By getting all of this sorted out from day one, you're preventing headaches down the road. This proactive approach is exactly what makes secure provisioning so effective. Now, let's move on to Objective 2.4, Manage Data Lifecycle. This is where we think about data as having a journey, from the moment it's created to the moment it's no longer needed. And just like a traveler needs different things at different stages of a journey, data needs different kinds of protection at different stages of its life. Data moves through 6 key stages in its life cycle: creation, storage, use, sharing, archiving, and destruction. Like any journey, each stage requires its own specific security considerations and protections. which we're going to explore in detail. But before we get further into those stages, let's clarify some key roles involved in managing data. We briefly covered this before in Domain 1, but it's important to have an understanding of who does what here and where the responsibilities lie within each role. First, we've already mentioned the data owner. They are the senior manager responsible for the data's protection and classification. They decide how sensitive the data is and what controls it needs. Next, we have the data controller. Think of them as the why person. They determine why we're collecting data and how we'll use it. For instance, when your company collects employee information for payroll, they're acting as the data controller, making sure everything complies with laws like GDPR. It's important to note here that the data owner and data controller could be the same person, but this largely depends on the size and structure of the organization. The data processor is like our trusted helper. Using our payroll example, this might be the third-party company that actually processes the paychecks. Understand that the data processor can only use the data exactly as the controller tells them to. No freestyling here. Then we have our data custodian. These are our IT heroes. They're in the trenches doing the technical work, running backups, applying security patches, keeping the systems running smoothly to protect the data either in their possession directly or simply traveling through their network. The data steward is our quality champion. They're focused on the business side, making sure our data is high quality, well organized, and follows all the rules. They handle things like metadata. That's the data about our data. Data governance and regulatory compliance. Finally, we have our data subjects. These are the individuals that the data is about. For example, customers whose personal information we store, or employees whose records we maintain. They have rights regarding their data and how it's used, which we must respect and protect. Okay, now that we have a better understanding of the roles and responsibilities of those involved with managing our data, let's go back to our data lifecycle and walk through these stages in more detail. There are 6 key phases in a data's lifecycle. The first step is to create, and this is when data first comes into existence. Whether we're generating it ourselves or collecting it from somewhere else. A best practice to remember here is that we should only collect the data we absolutely need. The less data you have, the less you have to protect. Next is store. Once we've created or collected our data, we need to keep it somewhere safe. This means choosing the right storage solutions and implementing strong security controls to protect that data while it's at rest. Then we have use. This is when people are actively working on the data. During this phase, we need strict access controls. Only authorized users should be able to access the data. Following 2 important principles, least privilege and need to know. Sometimes we need to share data with others. When we do this, we need to be extra careful. We might use encryption to protect the data while it's moving or in transit. Implement secure transfer protocols. And again, make sure we have proper access controls in place. At some point, data might become less active, but we still need to keep it. That's where archive comes in. Maybe we need to keep it for legal reasons, or maybe it's just important business records. This archive data still needs protection, but we might handle it differently than active data. And finally, we have destroy. When we no longer need data and there's no legal requirement to keep it, we need to get rid of it. And I mean really get rid of it. We need to make sure it's completely unrecoverable. We'll talk more about these specific destruction methods in a bit. But remember how we talked about data remanence in our last session? Let's review it again because it's crucial for understanding data destruction. Data remanence is when data stubbornly sticks around, even after you think you've deleted it. Think about deleting a file from your computer. When you hit delete or even empty the recycle bin, the data doesn't actually disappear. It's like using an eraser on paper. Even after erasing, you might still see traces of what was written. The same thing happens with digital data. It leaves traces on storage devices that could potentially be recovered using special tools. The concept of data remnants is really important to understand. So let's think about an example. Imagine you're selling your old laptop. You've deleted all your files and even reformatted the hard drive. You think it's clean, right? Well, without proper sanitization, someone with the right tools could still recover your sensitive data. Things like passwords, financial information, or personal documents. It's like throwing away a piece of paper with your credit card number on it, without shredding it first. So how do we make sure we completely destroy this data if it's so difficult to remove? To mitigate any data remnants, we use different sanitization methods. These methods all fall into 3 broad categories. Destroy is the most extreme, but also the most effective. It means physically destroying the storage media, burning it, crushing it, turning it into dust, making it absolutely impossible to retrieve any data. There's no coming back from that. Purge. This involves using logical or physical techniques to make the data unrecoverable, even with sophisticated forensic lab techniques. A great example is crypto shredding, and we'll talk about that shortly. Clear. This uses logical techniques, like overwriting the data, but there's still a possibility that some of the original data could be recovered with specialized tools. It's the least secure of the 3. NIST has a fantastic publication called SP 800-88. It provides detailed guidelines for media sanitization. Here's the order of effectiveness from most effective to least effective. Incinerate. Basically, turn it into ashes. This is the gold standard. Shred, disintegrate, and drill. Physically mangle the media. Shred it, smash it, drill holes through it. Degauss. This applies a strong magnetic field to a magnetic media, like old hard drives and tapes. It wipes the data, but it might also make the drive unusable. Encryption. This is also called crypto shredding or crypto erase. This is a clever technique. You encrypt the data with a very strong algorithm, like AES-256, and then you securely destroy the encryption key, using methods to ensure it cannot be recovered. Without the key, the data is just gibberish. This is extremely effective as long as that key is truly gone and cannot be recovered. Overwrite, wipe, and erasure. This involves writing all zeros or all ones or some combination to every sector of the storage device. You can do this multiple times, but even then, some data might still be recoverable. And then format. This is the least effective method. A quick format on a Windows computer, for example, just resets the file allocation table. It doesn't actually erase the data. The data is still there, it's just hidden until it gets overwritten by new data. It's fascinating how deleting a file just isn't enough, right? These techniques become even more critical as we move into modern computing environments, with cloud storage and mobile devices. Now let's shift our focus to some of the unique challenges we may face when we try to apply these data destruction principles in modern settings. With the rise of cloud storage, mobile devices, and IoT devices, data destruction has become more complex. These environments often require specialized approaches. First, with cloud storage, this is interesting because we often don't have physical access to the hardware. That's why we rely heavily on crypto shredding here, encrypting the data and then destroying the encryption keys. For mobile devices, it gets tricky because we're dealing with various operating systems and storage types. Each one might need a different approach or specialized tool to ensure proper data deletion. And then we have IoT devices, which present their own challenge. Many of these devices have very limited interfaces. There's often no screen or keyboard. This can make it really difficult to perform secure data deletion on them. The key is to ensure your data destruction methods align with both your security requirements and the specific characteristics of the storage medium you're dealing with. Moving on, I want to spend a little time explaining object reuse, because it can be a bit confusing. When we talk about object reuse, we're talking about what happens when we take storage space, like RAM or hard drive space, that was previously used for one thing and we want to use it for something else. So object reuse is just a fancy way to say you are overwriting data. Think of it like reusing a piece of paper. You want to make sure the previous writing is completely gone before using it again. For this reuse to be secure, we need to make sure there's absolutely no trace of the old data left behind when we assign the space to someone or something new. We do this through overwriting. But here's an important distinction for the exam. When we overwrite data, even multiple times, this is considered clearing the data, not purging it. So remember, object reuse involves overwriting data to clear it for new use, and overwriting is just a form of clearing. Now there's a special challenge we have with solid-state drives. These are different from traditional hard drives in an important way. Unlike traditional hard drives that use magnetic platters, solid-state drives use flash memory. This difference means we can't simply overwrite data on SSDs the same way we do with regular hard drives. When you try to overwrite data on an SSD, it might not completely remove the original data due to how flash memory works. So how do we securely delete data from solid-state drives? There are two main approaches here. First, you can use manufacturer-provided secure erase tools. Most SSD makers provide special software designed specifically for their drives. The other option is to use physical destruction. If secure erase tools aren't available, physically destroying the drive is the most reliable way to ensure data can't be recovered. But what about data stored in the cloud? You obviously can't just walk into a data center and start smashing hard drives. Cloud data presents unique challenges for secure deletion. This is where crypto shredding becomes incredibly valuable. You encrypt your data before you upload it to the cloud with strong encryption, like AES 256. And then you securely destroy the encryption key when you no longer need the data. This makes the data effectively unrecoverable. Even though the cloud provider still technically has the encrypted files, it's just scrambled information that can't be decoded without the key. So to recap, managing the data lifecycle is about protecting and governing data from creation to destruction. This includes establishing proper data roles like owners, custodians, and subjects, implementing secure processes at each lifecycle stage, and ensuring appropriate controls are in place to maintain confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Each stage requires specific security considerations, from collecting only necessary data at creation to using secure destruction methods at disposal. Throughout the lifecycle, we must maintain compliance with regulations while following security best practices like least privilege and need-to-know principles. Finally, let's talk about Objective 2.5, ensure appropriate asset retention. While this might not sound exciting at first, it's actually crucial for any organization. Think about it like this. As technology evolves, we need to make sure we can still open and use our important files and data, even when the hardware and software we originally used becomes outdated. It's like having a plan to protect your memories for years to come. It's about making sure you can still access your data, even as your hardware and software become obsolete. This is essentially planning for the future here. Speaking of hardware and software becoming obsolete, there are two key terms we need to address: end of life, or EOL, and end of support, or EOS. When a vendor announces EOL, or end of life for a product, it only means they've stopped selling it. You simply can't buy new units anymore. Think of it like a car manufacturer discontinuing a model. You can still drive the ones that are out there, but you can't go get a new one from the dealer. Now, EOS, or end of support, is much more serious from a security perspective. When a product reaches EOS, the vendor stops providing updates and security patches. This creates a significant security risk because when new vulnerabilities are discovered, and they will be discovered, there won't be any fixes available. Imagine having a door lock that you know is broken, but the manufacturer won't repair it anymore. That's essentially what EOS means for your technology. So which is worse for security? EOL or EOS? It's EOS because that's when you stop getting security patches. Now that we understand EOL and EOS, let's explore why proper retention planning is crucial for organizations. These lifecycle considerations directly impact how we approach asset retention. After all, we need to plan for what happens when our systems reach these milestones. So why is retention so important? Think about these scenarios. First, think about legacy systems. Many organizations find themselves with valuable data that's archived on obsolete storage like old tape drives, or locked in formats that only ancient software can read. This creates a real challenge. You need to maintain not just the hardware and software, but also keep someone around who understands how to operate these legacy systems. Now imagine this scenario. Your company gets hit with a regulatory audit. The auditors are asking for specific records from 5 years ago, but the software that can read those records is no longer supported. You're in a really tough spot because you can't access the data they need. This isn't just a hypothetical. It's a situation that companies face all too often, and it can have serious compliance implications. So why does data retention matter then? Let's talk about why retention matters in the context of legacy systems and modern challenges. First, there are legal and regulatory requirements. Many industries must keep records for specific timeframes. Healthcare organizations might need patient records for decades. But here's the challenge. Those records may be stored in legacy systems or obsolete formats. If you can't access them when needed, you're facing serious compliance issues. Consider your business operations and analytics. Your historical data is invaluable for decision making. But what happens when that data is locked in an old database system that's no longer supported? Without proper retention planning, you could lose access to critical business intelligence. Audits present another critical scenario. When auditors request records from 5 years ago, and they will, you need more than just the data. You need the ability to access and read it. Those records are stored in a format that only legacy software can read, and that software is no longer supported. You're in big trouble. Disaster recovery ties directly into this. Your retention policies must account for both storing and accessing data. If disaster strikes, can you restore from backups that were made using outdated systems? Will you still have the hardware and software needed to read those backups? And finally, consider legal defense. In a lawsuit, you might need to provide evidence from systems that are several years old. Having properly retained records is not enough. You need to also maintain the ability to access and verify those records, even as technology evolves. Effective retention policies must consider not just how long to keep the data, but also how to ensure it remains accessible as technology evolves and changes. Moving on, data archiving is a critical part of the asset lifecycle, focused on keeping data both safe and accessible for as long as needed. This retention period is determined by laws, regulations, industry standards, and business requirements. Some organizations have retention policies spanning decades or even centuries. This presents significant challenges for digital preservation. How do you ensure files created today will remain readable in 50, 100, or 150 years? The technology landscape changes rapidly, so careful consideration must be given to several factors. Now, when it comes to archiving data, there are several key requirements we need to consider carefully. First, we need to think about the storage media itself, what type we're using and how long it will last. This goes hand in hand with our security controls and encryption strategy to protect that data. We also need to carefully consider availability. How quickly and easily can authorized users access this archive data when they need it? And of course, we must ensure we're complying with all retention period requirements. Cost is another major factor. We need to balance our archiving needs with budget constraints. This includes considering the format we'll use. Don't forget about backup and redundancy planning. Just because data is archived doesn't mean we can forget about protecting it. This ties into geographic distribution. We don't want all our archive data in one location. And finally, we need robust access control mechanisms to protect this data. And we must perform regular integrity testing and validation to ensure our archive data remains intact and usable. Now, typically, archiving and retention policies are part of the overall data classification policy. Some important items to keep in mind regarding them are that the archiving and retention policy are based on laws, regulations, industry standards, and business needs. We must classify records accordingly and educate employees and provide them with the right tools. When you're creating an archiving policy, there are some key questions to consider. Who needs access to the data? Is it just a small group of people, or will it be widely accessible? Do access requirements change over time? Maybe certain data needs to be highly restricted initially, but it can be made more widely available after a certain period. How long does data need to be kept? This is the core question, and it's often driven by legal and regulatory requirements. What are the data disposal requirements? When the retention period is over, how will you securely destroy the data? Following the principles we discussed earlier. What are the security requirements for archived data? This is crucial. Archived data is often forgotten, but it can still be a target for attackers. It needs the same level of protection as active data, based on its classification. Retention planning requires a comprehensive strategy that considers several key aspects: managing the end-of-life and end-of-support transitions, maintaining access to legacy data and systems, ensuring compliance with regulatory requirements, supporting business operations and analytics, preparing for audits and legal proceedings, and implementing robust disaster recovery plans. The goal is to keep data both accessible and secure throughout its entire lifecycle, while adapting to technological changes and evolving business needs. So let's review the key points from today's session on data lifecycle and asset retention. Secure data provisioning requires proper roles and responsibilities. Remember the critical differences between data owners, custodians, and processors. The data lifecycle is continuous, from creation through destruction. We need security controls at every stage. Data destruction isn't just about deletion. We covered clearing, purging, and destruction methods, plus special considerations for solid-state drives. Asset retention planning must account for both end-of-life and end-of-support, with end-of-support being the more critical security concern since it means no more security patches. Archiving requires careful consideration of storage media, formats, and access controls to ensure long-term data accessibility. Remember, the goal isn't just to memorize these concepts, but to understand how they work together to maintain data security throughout its entire lifecycle. Think about how you'd apply these principles in real-world scenarios. Alright, that wraps up today's topics on Exam Objectives 2.3, 2.4, and 2.5. We've talked about secure provisioning, managing the data lifecycle, and ensuring appropriate asset retention. Remember, you can always go back and rewatch sections, pause, and take notes. These sessions will remain on YouTube for team replay. I've also been going back to each one after the live stream to add chapters so you can visit certain topics. The key here is to understand the concepts and not just memorize the details. Think about how these principles apply in real-world scenarios, and don't forget that managerial perspective. So who's ready to start the after party? We're all going to move over to the Study GRC Discord server and join the dedicated CISSP voice channel for open discussion and answer any questions you have. Don't miss this part. Not only can you dive into deeper discussion within a community, but you might even make some new friends. You're not on this journey alone. If you're not in the Discord yet, you can go to cissp.brettwhite.io for the Discord link. And don't forget to grab your CISSP role when you join, so you can find the secret channels. Next time, we'll be finishing up Domain 2 on asset security with Exam Objective 2.6, on Saturday, March 29th at 3 p.m. Central U.S. time. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in Discord.